September 1863, a trading post on the Missouri-Kansas border. Bill Anderson stood in the shadows near a stack of flour barrels, his hand resting on the grip of his Navy Colt. He had come for supplies, nothing more. His men were camped 3 miles south, waiting for salt and ammunition. The war had made everything scarce, even guerrillas needed to eat. The trading post was neutral ground, a place where both sides came with an unspoken truce. Union soldiers bought whiskey at one end of the counter, while Confederate sympathizers negotiated grain prices at the other. The owner, a thin man named Patterson, served everyone and asked no questions. That was how he stayed alive. Bill had been in the store for maybe 10 minutes when they walked in. 3 Union officers, blue coats still carrying dust from the road. One was a captain, judging by his insignia. The other 2 were lieutenants. They laughed as they entered, the kind of laugh that comes from men who feel safe, men who believe they are among friends. Bill pulled his hat lower and continued examining a bolt of cloth. He had no intention of starting a fight. Not today, not over nothing. Then the captain spoke. His voice carried across the store, confident and loud, the voice of a man used to being heard, used to giving orders that others obeyed without question. He was telling a story about Kansas City. Bill's hand tightened on the cloth until his knuckles turned white. Kansas City, August 1863. 1 month ago. The captain was describing the prison, the converted warehouse where the Union held women and children, political prisoners, they called them, leverage against the guerrillas, arrest the mothers, the sisters, the wives, keep them locked up until their men surrendered. Bill knew that prison. He knew it better than the captain could ever imagine. His sister Josephine had been held there, 14 years old, guilty of nothing except sharing blood with Bill Anderson. The Union had arrested her because of him, locked her in that rotting warehouse because her brother fought for the South. The captain was laughing now. He was describing how the building had collapsed, how the walls had given way, how the floors had caved in, one on top of another, crushing everyone inside. The officer called it an accident. He said the building was structurally unsound, old and neglected, a tragedy that no one could have prevented, just one of those things that happen in war. Then he used a word, one word, unfortunate. He called the deaths of those women unfortunate, like spilled milk, like a missed train, like bad weather ruining a picnic. Unfortunate. Bill felt something break inside him, something that had been holding him together since he got the news, a wall he had built between himself and the rage, between the brother and the killer. That wall crumbled with a single word. He remembered Josephine. Not as she died, crushed beneath falling timbers, screaming for 6 minutes while rescuers tried to reach her. He remembered her as a child, running through the fields behind their farmhouse, laughing at his jokes, asking him to read her stories before bed. She had been 14, still a child in so many ways, still innocent despite everything the war had taken from their family. And this man, this Union officer in his pressed blue coat, this captain who had never met her, never knew her name, never saw her face. He called her Death Unfortunate. Bill turned slowly. His movement was calm, deliberate, the movement of a man who has already decided what he is going to do. He looked at the captain for the first time. The officer was perhaps 40 years old, gray streaking his beard, soft around the middle in a way that suggested he spent more time behind a desk than on a horse. His medals gleamed on his chest, each one representing a battle he had survived by sending other men to die. Bill memorized his face, the shape of his jaw, the color of his eyes, the way he gestured with his hands when he spoke. Every detail burned itself into Bill's memory like a brand into flesh. The captain was still talking, still laughing, still describing the prison collapse as though it were an amusing anecdote from a dinner party. One of the lieutenants noticed Bill staring. He nudged the captain. The room went quiet. The captain turned to face Bill. His eyes narrowed, taking in the worn clothes, the trail dust, the hard look of a man who lived in the brush. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Bill smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb through tall grass. He tipped his hat to the officers and walked out of the store. Patterson, the owner, would later tell people that the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees when Bill Anderson smiled, that he had never seen such cold eyes on a living man, that he knew, in that moment, someone was going to die. He just did not know who. Outside, Bill mounted his horse. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. The rage inside him was not hot and wild. It was cold, focused, patient. He had 8 days of riding ahead of him. But first, he needed a name. The trading post sat at a crossroads where information flowed as freely as whiskey. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Secrets were currency, and Bill Anderson knew how to spend. He found an old man behind the stables, a Confederate sympathizer who cleaned saddles and listened to conversations. Bill had used him before. The old man's name was Hendricks. He had lost 2 sons to Union firing squads. He hated the bluecoats with a patience that came from knowing revenge was a dish best served cold. Bill described the captain, the gray beard, the soft middle, the medals on his chest, the way he laughed when he talked about dead women. Hendricks nodded slowly. He knew the man, Lieutenant Colonel James Davies, commander of the garrison at Fort Cumberland, 47 years old. Wife and 3 children back in Ohio, known for his efficiency in pacifying rebel territories. Pacifying, another word that meant something different than it sounded. Davies had been in Kansas City during the prison collapse. He was the one who signed the order keeping the women in the building despite reports that it was unsafe. When it fell, he wrote the official report calling the deaths an unfortunate accident. Unfortunate. There was that word again. Bill thanked Hendricks and pressed a gold coin into his palm. The old man refused it. "This one is for my boys," he said. "Make it hurt." Bill nodded. He intended to. Fort Cumberland was 40 miles east. A hard ride, but not impossible. The garrison had maybe 50 men, too many for a direct assault, but Bill was not planning a battle. He was planning a hunt. He rode through the night. The moon was 3/4 full, casting enough light to follow the trail without a lantern. Bill pushed his horse hard, but not cruelly. He would need the animal fresh for what came next. As he rode, he thought about Josephine. She had been the youngest of the Anderson children, the baby of the family. Their mother had died giving birth to her, which should have made Bill resent his sister. Instead, it made him protective. She was all that remained of their mother, the last gift she had given them. Bill had taught Josephine to ride, to shoot, to read the land and know when rain was coming. He had promised their father that he would keep her safe. He had failed. When the Union arrested her, Bill had been riding with Quantrill's raiders. By the time he heard the news, she was already in the prison. He tried to negotiate her release, tried to find someone who could get her out, but the Union wanted him to surrender, and Bill Anderson would not surrender, so they kept her locked up. A 14-year-old girl in a converted warehouse with 30 other women, sleeping on straw, eating slop that pigs would refuse, waiting for a brother who never came. And then the building fell. Some said the Union weakened the supports deliberately. Others claimed it was simply neglect, bad timber, rotten foundations, an accident waiting to happen. Bill knew the truth. It did not matter whether they meant to kill those women or simply did not care if they lived. The result was the same. Josephine died screaming his name. The rescuers who pulled her body from the rubble told Bill what they heard. They told him she called for him again and again, while the weight crushed her chest, while her lungs filled with dust and blood, while the life drained out of her drop by drop. She died believing her brother would save her, and he was not there. Bill carried a piece of her dress on his saddle. The dress she had been wearing when the building collapsed, it was still stained with her blood, still carried her scent beneath the copper smell of death. He touched it now as he rode through the darkness, a talisman, a reminder, a promise. The brother who failed to save her would become something else. He would become her vengeance. Dawn found Bill at the edge of a creek, watering his horse. He had covered 25 miles in the night, 15 more to Fort Cumberland. He would arrive by midday if he pushed hard, but he did not plan to assault the fort. He planned to draw Davies out. Bill knew how Union officers thought. They were proud, easily insulted, quick to respond to challenges against their honor. If word reached Davies that a lone Confederate guerrilla was hunting him, the lieutenant colonel would not cower behind his walls. He would come out fighting. Pride was a weakness Bill intended to exploit. He made camp in a stand of cottonwoods, hidden from the road, but close enough to watch travelers pass. He needed intelligence. He needed to know Davies' routines, his patrol schedules, his weaknesses. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, a wagon appeared on the road. A farmer and his wife, heading toward the trading post Bill had left the night before. Confederate sympathizers, judging by the careful way they avoided looking toward the fort. Bill stepped onto the road. The farmer pulled his horses to a stop. His wife clutched his arm, eyes wide with fear. They had heard stories about guerrillas. Not all of them were kind. Bill tipped his hat, kept his hands away from his guns. "I am looking for Lieutenant Colonel Davies," he said. "I understand he commands the garrison at Fort Cumberland." The farmer relaxed slightly. If this stranger meant them harm, he would not be making conversation. "Davies," the farmer said slowly. "He rides patrol every 3rd day, takes 20 men east toward the river, checks the bridges for sabotage." Bill nodded. "When did he last ride?" "Yesterday," the farmer replied. "He will be back tomorrow, maybe the day after." Bill thanked them and let them pass. He had what he needed. Davies was not at the fort. He was somewhere on the road between here and the river, with only 20 men instead of 50. Better odds. Bill mounted his horse and rode east. The trail was not hard to follow. 20 horses leave marks that even a child could read. Hoofprints in soft earth, broken branches where riders pushed through brush, droppings that told Bill how far ahead they were. By afternoon, he knew he was close. He found their camp just before sunset. They had stopped at a farmhouse, a Union loyalist family, judging by the flag flying from the porch. Davies and his men were taking supper inside, their horses tied in neat rows behind the barn. Bill counted heads through the windows. 18 men visible, 2 more probably on sentry duty. Davies himself sat at the head of the table, laughing at something one of his officers said. Laughing, always laughing. Bill considered his options. He could wait until nightfall and pick off the sentries. Could set fire to the barn and shoot anyone who ran out. Could charge straight through the front door and take as many with him as he could before they brought him down. But none of those options gave him what he wanted. He did not want Davies dead, not yet. He wanted Davies afraid. He wanted the lieutenant colonel to know he was being hunted, wanted him to jump at every shadow, to flinch at every sound, to feel, even for a moment, what Josephine felt in that collapsing building, helpless, trapped, knowing death was coming and unable to stop it. Bill withdrew into the tree line and made cold camp. No fire, no cooking, just hardtack and dried beef, eaten in silence while he watched the farmhouse lights go out one by one. Tomorrow would be day 2. He had 6 more days of hunting ahead, and he intended to use every one of them. Day 2 began with blood. Bill woke before dawn to the sound of hooves on the road. A Union patrol, 3 men riding past his position. Scouts, probably. Sent ahead to check the route for Davies' return to the fort. They never saw him. Bill moved through the brush like smoke. Silent, patient. His knife was in his hand. Before the first rider knew he was there, the scout died without a sound. Bill's blade found the gap between his ribs, piercing his heart from behind. He slumped in his saddle, and Bill caught him before he could fall. The second rider turned at the soft thump. His eyes went wide when he saw the gorilla holding his dead comrade. He opened his mouth to shout. Bill's knife took him in the throat. The third rider wheeled his horse and tried to run. He made it maybe 20 yards before Bill's Colt barked twice. Both shots found their mark. 3 Union scouts dead in under a minute. Bill dragged their bodies into the brush and stripped them of weapons and ammunition. He took their horses too. They might be useful later. But he left one thing behind. A piece of Josephine's bloody dress, pinned to a tree where Davies would find it, and a message scratched into the bark with his knife. Unfortunate, Davies would understand. By mid-morning, Bill had circled ahead of the Union patrol. He knew their route now, knew the bridges they would check, knew the roads they would take back to Fort Cumberland. He set his trap at a creek crossing. The bridge was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 horses to ride abreast. The water below was shallow but fast, filled with rocks that would slow any attempt to ford. The banks on either side were steep, choked with underbrush that would hide a man until he was ready to strike. Bill tied the captured horses in a clearing a quarter-mile back. If things went wrong, he would need a way to escape. Then he took position on the south bank, hidden in a thicket of blackberry bushes, and waited. The Union patrol arrived just past noon. They rode in a loose column, relaxed despite the distance from their fort. Davies was near the front, still laughing at something one of his officers said. The man laughed like breathing, like he did not know any other way to exist. Bill watched them approach the bridge. His rifle was steady in his hands. He had already picked his first 3 targets. Officers, all of them. Men who gave orders while others died. The column started across the bridge. Bill let the first 10 men pass. He wanted Davies on the bridge when the shooting started, wanted him trapped between the bullets and the water. When Davies reached the center of the span, Bill fired. His first shot took the officer immediately behind Davies. The man toppled from his saddle and crashed into the shallow water below, staining the current red. The column exploded into chaos. Horses reared and screamed. Men shouted conflicting orders. Some tried to charge forward off the bridge, while others wheeled back toward the far bank. In the confusion, Bill fired again and again. 3 more officers fell. 2 soldiers managed to return fire, but they were shooting blind into the brush. Their bullets whipped through the leaves around Bill without touching him. Davies was shouting now, not orders, just shouting. His horse danced beneath him, spooked by the gunfire and the smell of blood. The lieutenant colonel clung to his saddle with white-knuckled hands. Bill put a bullet through the head of Davies's horse. The animal collapsed instantly, throwing Davies into the water. The lieutenant colonel disappeared beneath the surface for a moment, then came up sputtering, his uniform soaked and his medals gleaming dully in the afternoon sun. He looked directly at the thicket where Bill was hidden. For one moment, their eyes met. Bill smiled. Then he withdrew into the forest, leaving the Union patrol to count their dead. 4 officers dead. The commander unhorsed and humiliated. The patrol in disarray. And somewhere in their leader's eyes, Bill had seen it. Fear. It was a start. Day 3 brought rain. Bill sheltered in a cave he had used before, back when he was riding with Quantrill. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall that had swollen to twice its normal size in the storm. No one would find him here. He sat in the darkness and listened to the thunder. In his hands, he held Josephine's dress. The blood had dried months ago, but he could still feel her in the fabric, could still smell the soap she used, could still remember how she had worn this dress to church on Sundays, twirling in the aisle until their father told her to stop. She had been so alive then, so full of joy that it seemed impossible she could ever die. Bill remembered the day the Union came for her. He had been away, riding with the guerrillas. Their father had died the previous winter, leaving the farm to Bill and his sisters. The older girls had married and moved away. Only Josephine remained, keeping the house while Bill fought a war he was no longer sure he believed in. The Union soldiers came at dawn, a full company sent to arrest the family members of known guerrillas. They gave Josephine 10 minutes to gather her belongings. Then they put her on a wagon and took her to Kansas City. Bill did not learn what had happened until 2 days later. By then, she was already in the prison, already sleeping on straw in a converted warehouse with 30 other women, already wondering why her brother had not come to save her. He had tried, God knows he had tried, but the Union would not negotiate. They wanted Bill Anderson in chains or in a coffin. Nothing less would buy his sister's freedom, and Bill would not surrender, not for anyone, not even for Josephine. He had told himself it was strategy, told himself that if he surrendered, the Union would simply arrest more guerrilla families, told himself that holding out was the only way to protect the others. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was afraid of the rope, afraid of the firing squad, afraid of dying in a Union prison like so many of his friends. And because of that fear, his sister died alone. Bill squeezed the dress until his knuckles turned white. He had failed her, failed to protect her, failed to save her, failed in the one promise he had made to their dying mother. But he would not fail to avenge her. Davies would pay for calling her death unfortunate, would pay for laughing while Bill's world collapsed around him, would pay for wearing those medals and giving orders and sleeping soundly while Josephine screamed her last breaths into the darkness. Bill would make sure of it, even if it was the last thing he did. The rain stopped near midnight. Bill emerged from the cave and checked his weapons. His Colt was dry, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp. His rifle was clean and loaded. His knife was sharp enough to shave with. He mounted his horse and rode into the darkness. He had 5 more days of hunting ahead, and Davies was starting to run. Day 4 dawned cold and clear. Bill picked up Davies' trail easily. The lieutenant colonel had abandoned his patrol route and was making straight for Fort Cumberland. His men were spooked, jumping at shadows, firing at sounds in the brush. They had found his message, found the piece of Josephine's dress pinned to the tree, found the word he had carved into the bark, unfortunate. Now they knew who was hunting them. Bill followed at a distance, watching their movements, counting their numbers. The patrol had started with 20 men. After the ambush at the bridge, they were down to 15, and at least 3 of those were wounded, slumped in their saddles, barely able to stay mounted. Davies pushed them hard. No rest, no stops, just mile after mile of hard riding toward the safety of the fort. But Fort Cumberland was still a day away, and Bill Anderson did not intend to let them get there. He circled ahead, using trails only the guerrillas knew. By mid-afternoon, he was waiting at a fork in the road. The left path led to the fort. The right led to a Confederate sympathizers' farm where Davies' men might find supplies. Bill cut a tree across the left path. It would take them an hour to clear it, maybe more. And while they worked, they would be exposed, vulnerable. Then he rode to the sympathizers' farm. The farmer was named Collins, an old man with a young wife and 3 sons too young to fight. He had helped the guerrillas before, hiding them when Union patrols came through, feeding them when their supplies ran low. Bill found him in the barn, tending his horses. Collins recognized him immediately. His face went pale. "Bill Anderson," he said, "I heard you were hunting a Union colonel." Bill nodded. "He will be here soon. His men need supplies, and the direct road is blocked." Collins understood. "You want me to delay them?" Bill shook his head. "I want you to welcome them." The old farmer stared. "Welcome them?" "Treat them like guests," Bill said. "Feed them, water their horses, make them comfortable." Collins was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "What happens then?" he asked. Bill touched the piece of Josephine's dress on his saddle. "Then I come for dinner." Collins swallowed hard, but did not argue. He had lost a brother to Union firing squads. He understood vengeance. Bill withdrew to a ridge overlooking the farm and waited. The Union patrol arrived just before sunset. They were exhausted, Davies barely able to stay in his saddle, his officers no better. The wounded men had to be helped from their horses and carried into the barn. Collins greeted them with perfect hospitality, offered them food, water, shelter. His wife brought out bread and stew while his sons tended the horses. Davies was suspicious at first, but hunger and exhaustion won out over caution. He ordered his men to stand down and accept the farmer's generosity. Bill watched from the ridge. He counted heads as the soldiers filed into the farmhouse for supper. 14 men plus Davies. The wounded were left in the barn, too weak to join the meal. 15 against 1, worse odds than the bridge. But Bill was not planning a frontal assault, he was planning a siege. As darkness fell, Bill moved. He started with the horses, slipped into the corral with his knife and cut their hobbles one by one. Then he spooked them with a thrown rock, sending them stampeding into the night. The Union soldiers came running out of the farmhouse, weapons drawn. They saw their horses disappearing into the darkness and gave chase. 12 men ran after the horses. 3 stayed to guard Davies. Bill circled to the barn. The wounded soldiers were barely conscious. They did not see him until it was too late. His knife moved in the darkness, silent and sure. When the guards came to check on their wounded, Bill was waiting. 2 more Union soldiers died without firing a shot. The third managed to scream before Bill's bullet took him in the chest. Davies heard the scream. He came running from the farmhouse, pistol in hand, shouting for his men. Bill melted into the shadows. The lieutenant colonel found his wounded dead, found his guards dead, found a piece of bloody fabric pinned to the barn door, another message scratched into the wood. 5 days left. Davies stood in the doorway of the barn, staring at the words. His hands were shaking, his face was pale. The confident officer who had laughed about unfortunate deaths was gone. In his place was a man who knew he was going to die. He just did not know when. Bill watched from the tree line as the surviving soldiers returned with the horses. Watched them discover the bodies in the barn. Watched Davies try to explain how a single guerrilla had killed 5 men under his command without taking a scratch. The lieutenant colonel ordered a retreat immediately, despite the darkness, despite the exhaustion, despite everything. His men obeyed without question. They had seen enough. Bill let them go. He had 3 more days of hunting ahead, and the chase was just beginning. Day 5 was the day Bill stopped being alone. He was camped in a hollow 2 miles from the road when he heard horses approaching. His hand went to his Colt, but he recognized the rhythm of the hoofbeats before the riders appeared. Archie Clement was the first to emerge from the trees, small and vicious, with a face that made children cry. He was the most feared of all Quantrill's guerrillas, a killer who enjoyed his work in ways that made even Bill uncomfortable. Behind him came Frank James, tall and quiet, with sad eyes that hid a sharp mind. He was the thinker of the group, the one who planned while others acted. 4 more guerrillas followed, men Bill had ridden with before, men who knew Josephine and what she had meant to him. Archie reined in beside Bill's camp. "We heard you were hunting a Union colonel," he said. Bill nodded. "Davies. He called my sister's death unfortunate." Archie spat on the ground. "Unfortunate," he repeated. "That is a terrible word." Frank dismounted and walked to Bill's side. "We are here to help," he said. "If you want us." Bill was silent for a long moment. He had started this hunt alone, had wanted to keep it personal. His sister, his vengeance, no one else. But Davies was running now, running hard, with whatever men he had left, making straight for Fort Cumberland. Once he reached those walls, getting to him would be nearly impossible. Bill needed help. He looked at the men who had come. 6 guerrillas, each one a killer in his own right. Together, they had terrorized Union forces across Missouri and Kansas. Together, they had made the blue coats afraid to ride alone. "This one is mine," Bill said finally. "When we catch him, you stay back." Archie grinned. His teeth were yellow and sharp. "Whatever you say, Bill." Frank nodded silently. He understood. The 7 guerrillas rode out together. Davy's trail was easy to follow. The lieutenant colonel had abandoned all pretense of stealth, pushing his men as fast as their horses could carry them. They were maybe 5 hours ahead, moving at a pace that would kill their mounts if they kept it up. Bill matched their pace. By midday, he had cut the distance in half. The Union patrol was down to 11 men now. 4 had fallen behind, their horses too exhausted to continue. Bill and his guerrillas found them on the road, dismounted and trying to lead their animals. Archie wanted to kill them. Bill refused. "Let them go," he said. "They are not the ones I want." The Union soldiers watched in disbelief as 7 guerrillas rode past them without drawing a weapon. They did not understand mercy from men like these, but it was not mercy. Bill wanted Davies to know that his men were being left alive, wanted him to understand that this hunt was personal, that the guerrillas were not interested in random killing. They wanted one man, and they would not stop until they had him. Word traveled fast. By the time the sun set, Davies knew that Bill Anderson was no longer alone, knew that 6 of the most feared guerrillas in Missouri were riding behind him, knew that the walls of Fort Cumberland were still 20 miles away. Too far, not nearly far enough. Davies made camp that night in a farmhouse owned by a Union loyalist. He posted sentries on all approaches, ordered his men to sleep in shifts, kept a loaded pistol on the table beside his bed. It did not matter. Bill was coming, and nothing was going to stop him. Day 6 began with fire. Bill woke before dawn and gathered his men in the darkness. The farmhouse where Davies had taken shelter was visible in the distance, lights flickering in the windows. The lieutenant colonel was not sleeping. Bill could see his silhouette pacing behind the curtains, back and forth, like a caged animal. Frank James studied the farmhouse through a spyglass. 10 men plus Davies, he reported, 6 on sentry duty, 4 inside with the colonel. Bill nodded. "We need them out in the open." Archie grinned. "I have an idea." The barn stood 50 yards from the house, a large structure filled with hay and livestock. Archie circled around to approach it from the blind side, invisible to the sentries. 5 minutes later, flames erupted from the barn roof. The Union soldiers came running. Fire was the great equalizer on the frontier, capable of destroying everything a family owned in a matter of minutes. Even enemies would set aside their weapons to fight a blaze. The sentries abandoned their posts. The men inside rushed out to help. Even Davies emerged, shouting orders, trying to organize a bucket brigade. Bill and his guerrillas were waiting. The first volley cut down 3 soldiers before they knew they were under attack. The second volley took 2 more. By the time Davies realized what was happening, half his men were dead or dying. The lieutenant colonel drew his pistol and fired wildly into the tree line. His shots went wide, striking nothing but bark and leaves. Bill stepped out of the shadows. Their eyes met across the burning farmyard. Davies' face went white. His hand shook so badly that his pistol slipped from his grip and fell into the dirt. Bill raised his Colt and took aim, but he did not fire. Not yet. Instead, he shouted across the flames, "Which one of you called my sister's death unfortunate?" The surviving Union soldiers looked at each other in confusion. They did not understand, did not know what Bill was talking about, but Davies knew. His legs buckled beneath him. He dropped to his knees in the mud, hands raised in surrender. "Please," he begged, "it was just a word. I did not mean anything by it." Bill's finger tightened on the trigger. "Just a word," he repeated. "Is that what you think?" The fire behind him crackled and roared. The heat washed over his back like the breath of something ancient and terrible. "She was 14 years old," Bill said. "Her name was Josephine. She liked to dance in the churchyard and read books by candlelight. She used to braid flowers into her hair in springtime." Davies was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am so sorry." Bill shook his head slowly. "Sorry is just a word too," he said. "Words do not bring back the dead." He lowered his Colt, but not because he was showing mercy. He had something else in mind. "Take him," he told his men. Archie and Frank moved forward, grabbing Davies by the arms. The lieutenant colonel struggled, screaming for help, but his surviving soldiers were too busy running for their lives. The guerrillas dragged Davies into the forest. Bill followed, pausing only to pick up the lieutenant colonel's fallen pistol, a Union officer's weapon used to kill Union soldiers. There was a poetry in that. The remaining soldiers scattered into the night, wounded, terrified, stripped of their commander. They would make it back to Fort Cumberland eventually, carrying stories of what they had seen. Stories of Bill Anderson stepping out of the flames like a demon from hell. Stories of the hunt that lasted 8 days. Stories that would spread across Missouri and Kansas, making the name Bloody Bill a synonym for terror. But that was all still to come. For now, Bill had what he wanted. Davies was his, and the real work was about to begin. Day 7 was the longest of James Davies' life. The guerrillas took him deep into the Missouri woods, following trails that only men born to the brush could know. They bound his hands behind his back and tied a rope around his neck like a leash, forcing him to stumble behind Bill Anderson's horse for mile after mile. Davies fell 7 times during that march. Each time, Bill waited patiently while the lieutenant colonel struggled to his feet. He offered no help, no water, no rest. Just that cold, patient stare that Davies had come to fear more than any bullet. By nightfall, they reached their destination. It was a covered bridge spanning a creek that had run dry months ago. The structure was old, built before the war, its timbers weathered and gray. Initials had been carved into the railings by young lovers, long since scattered by the conflict. Bill dismounted and walked to the center of the bridge. He stood there for a long moment, looking down at the dry creek bed below. The moonlight cast strange shadows through the gaps in the wooden planks. Archie and Frank dragged Davies forward. The lieutenant colonel was barely conscious. His uniform was torn and filthy, soaked with sweat and blood from the cuts on his wrists where the ropes had bitten into flesh. The medals on his chest were dull now, covered in mud. Bill did not look at him. "Do you know where we are?" he asked quietly. Davies shook his head. His voice came out as a croak. "This is Miller's Creek Bridge," Bill said. 3 years ago, before the war, I brought my sister here for a picnic. She was 11 years old. She packed bread and cheese and a jar of honey from our own bees." He paused, remembering. "We sat right here, on this spot, and she told me she wanted to be a school teacher when she grew up, said she wanted to teach children to read because reading was the most important thing in the world." Davies' legs gave out. He collapsed onto the bridge floor, too weak to stand. Bill continued, as if he had not noticed. "She loved books," he said. "Our father bought her a new one every Christmas, even when times were hard. She would read them by candlelight until the wax ran out, then read by moonlight through the window." His voice never wavered, never rose above a conversational tone. But there was something in it that made Davies wish he would scream instead. Screaming would have been easier to bear. When the building fell on her, Bill said, she was holding a book, a collection of psalms that had belonged to our mother. The rescuers found it crushed beneath the same beam that broke her spine. Bill turned to face Davies for the first time. His eyes were dry, empty of tears. Empty of everything except that terrible cold patience. "They told me she screamed for 6 minutes before she died," Bill said. 6 minutes of agony while the weight crushed her chest and her lungs filled with dust. 6 minutes of calling my name, hoping I would come and save her. He knelt down until his face was level with Davies. "I was not there," Bill whispered. "I failed her. That is something I will carry until the day I die." Davies tried to speak, tried to beg again, but Bill cut him off with a raised hand. "But you," Bill said, "you were there. You signed the order keeping those women in that building. You knew the structure was unsafe. You knew they would die if it collapsed." "I did not know," Davies choked out. "I swear I did not know." Bill shook his head slowly. "You knew," he said. "Everyone knew. The other officers warned you. The inspectors filed reports. Even the prisoners themselves could feel the floors shifting beneath their feet." Tears were streaming down Davy's face now. "Please," he sobbed. "I have children, a wife back in Ohio. They need me." Bill reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of paper. A pencil followed. He placed both in front of Davies. "You are going to write them a letter," Bill said. Davies stared at the paper through blurred eyes. "What?" "A letter to your family," Bill repeated, "telling them exactly what happened here, what you did, what you said, what the word unfortunate cost you." The lieutenant colonel's hands shook so badly he could barely hold the pencil. Bill untied his wrists. "Write," he commanded. Davies picked up the pencil. His hand trembled as he began to form letters on the page. Bill stood over him, watching. "Tell them about Kansas City," Bill instructed. "Tell them about the 30 women you held prisoner. Tell them about the building you knew was going to fall," Davies wrote. His tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. "Tell them about Josephine Anderson," Bill continued. "Tell them she was 14 years old. Tell them she loved books and wanted to be a school teacher." The pencil scratched across the paper. "Tell them you called her death unfortunate," Bill said. "And tell them what that word meant to you. A minor inconvenience, a footnote in a report, nothing more than a broken wagon wheel." Davy's hand stopped moving. "I cannot," he whispered. Bill drew his knife. "You can," he said, "and you will." The lieutenant colonel looked at the blade, then at Bill's face, then at the paper in front of him. He began to write again. It took 2 hours. Bill made him describe everything, every decision, every order, every report he had signed that led to those women's deaths. He made him write about the screaming, about the dust and the blood, and the bodies pulled from the rubble. He made him write about Josephine, about a 14-year-old girl who died calling for her brother, while the weight of a building crushed the life out of her, one slow breath at a time. When Davies finally finished, his hand was cramped and his eyes were swollen shut from crying. The letter was 8 pages long, filled with confessions that would shame his family for generations. Bill took the letter and read it carefully. Then he folded it and placed it in his pocket. "This is good," he said. "Your children will know who their father really was." Davies slumped forward, all the fight gone out of him. "Just kill me," he begged. "Please, just make it stop." Bill shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "You have one more thing to learn?" He pulled out the piece of Josephine's bloody dress. The fabric was stained dark brown now, the blood long since dried. But in the moonlight, it still looked red, still looked fresh. Bill tied it around Davy's neck like a noose. "You are going to understand what unfortunate really means," he said. "Before you die, you are going to feel what she felt." Davies began to scream. Bill let him. There was no one to hear. What happened next was recorded in Union reports as unspeakable. The officers who wrote those reports were not prone to exaggeration. They had seen the horrors of war firsthand. They had witnessed battles that left fields covered with the dead. They had heard stories of atrocities committed by both sides. But what Bill Anderson did to Lieutenant Colonel James Davies made seasoned soldiers vomit. He did not simply kill the man, he educated him. For hours, Davies learned about pain, about fear, about the helplessness of knowing death was coming and being unable to stop it. Bill made him experience what Josephine experienced, the crushing weight, the inability to breathe, the screaming that no one answered. He was precise, methodical, patient, and he never lost control. That was the part that disturbed Frank James the most. He had seen men kill before, had seen them lost in rage, hacking and slashing without thought. But Bill was calm throughout, speaking softly, explaining what he was doing and why, as if he were teaching a lesson. Perhaps he was. Davies begged for death long before Bill granted it. He promised anything, offered everything, called upon God and country and family. None of it mattered. Bill was beyond reach, beyond reason, beyond mercy. The brother who had failed to save his sister was gone. In his place was something else, something born from grief and rage and guilt, something that would become a legend. When Davies finally died, dawn was breaking over the covered bridge. Bill stood over the body for a long moment, breathing heavily. His hands were stained red. His clothes were soaked with blood that was not his own. He looked at the mess he had made and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no closure, just emptiness. Josephine was still dead. The building had still fallen. The 6 minutes of screaming still echoed in his mind. Killing Davies had not changed any of that, but it had changed Bill Anderson. The guerrillas buried the body beneath the bridge. They worked in silence, disturbed by what they had witnessed. Even Archie Clement, who had seen and done terrible things himself, was quiet. Frank James was the first to speak. "What now?" he asked. Bill cleaned his knife on Davies' coat before sheathing it. "Now we send a message," he said. He climbed onto the covered bridge and began to work. When he was finished, Davies' body hung from the rafters by a rope around its neck. The bloody piece of Josephine's dress was tied like a bow beneath the lieutenant colonel's chin. A note was pinned to his chest. It read, "This was unfortunate." Bill stepped back to examine his work. "The Union would find this," he said. "They will know what happens when they call my sister's death unfortunate." Archie grinned. His yellow teeth caught the morning light. "They will know," he agreed. "Everyone will know." Bill mounted his horse. "Let them come," he said. "I am not hiding anymore." He rode away from the bridge without looking back. Day 8 had begun, and bloody Bill Anderson was born. The Union found Davies 3 days later. A patrol from Fort Cumberland, sent to look for their missing commander, stumbled across the covered bridge just after noon. The screaming of the young private who first saw the body could be heard half a mile away. The commanding officer who examined the scene was a veteran of 2 years of war. He had seen things that would haunt him until his dying day. But Davies' body was different. He wrote in his report that the lieutenant colonel had been subjected to prolonged torture before death, that his wounds suggested he had lived for hours after the initial assault, that the mutilation was systematic, methodical, almost surgical in its precision. He did not describe the specific injuries. "Some things," he wrote, "are too terrible to commit to paper." The note pinned to Davies' chest was forwarded to Union Command in St. Louis. The generals who read it recognized the message immediately. Someone had taken offense at the word unfortunate, and that someone had made his displeasure violently clear. The story spread quickly. Within a week, every Union officer in Missouri knew what had happened to James Davies, knew that a guerrilla named Bill Anderson had hunted him for 8 days, knew what he had done when he caught him. The phrase "unfortunate accident" disappeared from official reports overnight. Commanders began using different language: regrettable incident, unavoidable tragedy, unforeseen circumstances. Anything but unfortunate. They were afraid, and they had every right to be. Bill Anderson did not stop with Davies. Over the next 18 months, he killed over 200 Union soldiers. He attacked patrols, ambushed supply trains, raided outposts. He scalped his victims and braided their hair into his horses' reins. He became the most feared guerrilla in the Civil War. The man who had once fought for the Confederacy now fought for something else, something darker, something personal. Every Union soldier he killed was James Davies. Every scream he heard was Josephine. Every bullet he fired was a prayer for his dead sister. He never married, never had children, never built anything that would outlast him. All he had was the hunt, and the hunt consumed him. The stories that grew around Bill Anderson were legendary. They said he could not be killed, that bullets passed through him without leaving a wound, that he had made a deal with the devil in exchange for vengeance. They said his horse was the fastest in Missouri, bred from hellfire and shadow, that his knife never needed sharpening because it fed on blood, that his eyes glowed red in the darkness like a demon's. None of it was true. Bill Anderson was just a man, a broken man, a man who had lost everything he loved and found nothing to replace it except rage. But legends do not need to be true to be powerful. And the legend of Bloody Bill Anderson was very powerful indeed. Union soldiers refused to patrol alone. Officers stopped using their real names in correspondence. Entire garrisons relocated rather than face the guerrilla who had tortured their colleague to death over 8 days. Bill used that fear. He used it to recruit, used it to intimidate, used it to win battles before they began. Sometimes the mere rumor that Bloody Bill was in the area was enough to make Union troops retreat. The fear he inspired was more effective than any weapon. But fear has a cost. Bill Anderson paid that cost every day of his remaining life. He stopped sleeping through the night. Dreams of Josephine haunted him, dreams of the building falling, dreams of her screaming his name while he was miles away, unable to help. He stopped eating regular meals. Food tasted like ashes in his mouth. Nothing satisfied him. Nothing filled the emptiness that Davy's death had failed to address. He stopped laughing. The other guerrillas noticed it first. Bill had once been quick to smile, ready with a joke to lighten the mood. Now his face was carved from stone. His eyes were empty. The man who hunted Davies was not the same man who rode back from that covered bridge. Something had been burned out of him. Something that would never grow back. Frank James tried to talk to him about it once. They were camped in a hollow, waiting for word of a Union supply train. The fire had burned low, and most of the men were sleeping. Frank sat down beside Bill. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. Bill was cleaning his knife. The blade caught the firelight, gleaming red like blood. "Regret what, Davies?" Frank said. "What you did to him?" Bill was silent for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "I regret that I could not do it slower." Frank nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. "Does it help?" he asked. "Does killing them make you feel better?" Bill stopped cleaning the knife. He looked at Frank with those empty eyes. "Nothing makes me feel better," he said. "Nothing ever will. She is dead. And I failed her, and no amount of killing can change that." "Then why do you do it?" Frank pressed. Bill sheathed his knife and stood up. "Because it is all I have left," he said. "Because if I stop, I have to face what I have become, and I am not ready for that." He walked away into the darkness. Frank James never asked him about it again. The end came for Bill Anderson on October 27th, 1864. He was riding with a small group of guerrillas near Albany, Missouri, when they stumbled into a Union ambush. Over 150 soldiers were waiting in the brush, hidden and ready. Bill saw them first. Any other man would have retreated, would have recognized that the odds were impossible, would have chosen survival over glory. But Bill Anderson was not any other man. He looked at his 30 guerrillas, looked at the 150 Union soldiers blocking their path, looked at the road ahead, and smiled. It was the first real smile his men had seen in months. "Follow me," he said. Then he charged. The guerrillas followed without hesitation. They had ridden with Bloody Bill through hell itself. They would ride with him into death. The Union soldiers opened fire. Bill took 2 bullets to the head and 2 to the chest. He did not fall immediately. He kept riding, kept firing, kept killing. 3 Union soldiers died by his hand after he was already mortally wounded. Finally, his horse stumbled. Bill Anderson hit the ground hard. He lay on his back, staring up at the Missouri sky. The clouds were moving slowly overhead. The sounds of battle faded into the distance. He thought of Josephine, thought of her dancing in the churchyard, reading books by candlelight, braiding flowers into her hair. He thought of the covered bridge where he had taught Davies about Unfortunate. He thought of the bloody dress that still hung from his saddle. His last words were spoken so softly that only the Union soldier who shot him could hear. Was that unfortunate enough? Then Bill Anderson died. The Union soldiers who found him did not treat his body with respect. They cut off his trigger finger as proof of the kill. They stripped him of his weapons and his clothes. They posed with his corpse for photographs, grinning like hunters with a trophy. They displayed his body in the town square for 3 days. People came from miles around to see the famous Bloody Bill Anderson. Some came to spit on him, others came to mourn. A few women tried to stab his corpse with kitchen knives, screaming about husbands and sons he had killed. The Union officers stood back and watched. They had hunted this man for 18 months, had lost countless soldiers trying to bring him down, had lived in fear of his shadow. Now he was dead, but even in death, Bill Anderson was not finished haunting them. When they finally buried him, they found the piece of Josephine's dress still tied to his saddle. A young lieutenant tried to remove it. The fabric would not come loose. The knots were too tight, the leather too stiff. They had to cut the saddle apart to free it. The lieutenant looked at the bloody cloth in his hands. He had heard the story of James Davies. Everyone had. He knew what this piece of fabric represented. "Burn it," his commanding officer ordered. The lieutenant threw it into a fire. The fabric caught quickly, the old blood crackling in the flames. It took maybe 30 seconds to reduce to ash. But the smell lingered for hours, and the soldiers who breathed it said later that they could not get it out of their minds, that the scent followed them into their dreams, that they woke screaming in the night, hearing a young girl call for her brother. The legend of Bloody Bill Anderson did not die with the man. It grew. People told stories about him for generations. Books were written. Songs were sung. His name became synonymous with vengeance in Missouri and Kansas. They said he was a monster, a killer without conscience, a demon in human form. They were not entirely wrong, but they left out the parts that mattered. They left out the 14-year-old girl who died calling for her brother. They left out the building that collapsed on 30 innocent women. They left out the word that started it all, unfortunate. James Davies thought it was just a word, a throwaway comment, a bureaucratic phrase in an official report. He was wrong. Words have power. Words can create. Words can destroy. And some words can turn a man into a legend. Bill Anderson heard that word in a trading post on the Missouri-Kansas border. 8 days later, Lieutenant Colonel James Davies died on a covered bridge, with that word carved into the beam above his head. And the man who killed him became something more than human. He became a story. Stories do not die like men. They grow, they change, they spread from person to person, generation to generation. The story of Bloody Bill Anderson is still told today. People argue about what it means. Some call him a hero, others call him a monster. Most agree he was both. But everyone remembers the word that started it all. Unfortunate. If you are a Union officer reading this, take note. Choose your words carefully, because somewhere out there, someone is listening, someone who has lost everything, someone who has nothing left to lose, someone who will spend 8 days hunting you down if you say the wrong thing. And when they find you, they will teach you what unfortunate really means. Just like Bill Anderson taught James Davies on a covered bridge in the Missouri woods 160 years ago. The lesson still applies. Some words are too dangerous to use. Some deaths are too personal to dismiss. And some brothers will never stop hunting, no matter how long it takes, no matter how many have to die, no matter what. This is the story of Bill Anderson and the Union commander who called his sister's death unfortunate. 8 days of hunting. One word that changed everything, and a piece of bloody fabric that still haunts the dreams of those who burned it. Remember this story, and choose your words wisely, because you never know who is listening, and you never know what word will be the last thing you ever say. Unfortunate, such a terrible word. James Davies learned that too late. Do not make the same mistake. This was the hunt of Bill Anderson, and this is where our story ends. But the legend continues forever.